Welcome back to the Productivity Hub. This is where productivity habits unlock breakthroughs. We're all about helping our small and mid-sized businesses and organizations use their existing Google and Microsoft business applications and software more effectively, more productively, create a culture around productivity so that you have the foundation to grow into our AI revolution and leverage these tools that are really going to make a big impact in your business and in your customer base in the months and years to come. We interview a lot of different people on the Productivity Hub, and our guest today is a really excellent variation from some of the people you've heard from recently. Michael Hofeld is a serial entrepreneur. He's been responsible for $5 billion in online sales. He's the author of 4 books. He's the former vice president at a public company. He has an extensive background in online travel and marketing, and he's currently working in the AI space around storytelling, world building, and custom content. So he's going to be able to bring a really unique perspective to from AI to our conversation here today. And we're going to be focused really specifically on spreadsheet applications. But let me go ahead and welcome Michael. Michael, how's it going?
It's going very, very well. I really appreciate you having me on. It's always fun to, chop it up about the different ways you can approach a business and productivity. So I'm happy to be able to share whatever I can with your audience.
Yeah, perfect. And just to give us some context, tell us about your core business right now, what that looks like, and the role that technology and AI is playing in PawWord.
Well, as you said, I spent a long time in online travel and, in pandemic, and it wasn't so much fun to be in travel. And I kind of got like a crash course in data science and did a bunch of things. And when AI started to push out about a year ago, I had the idea for PawWord. There's a big story behind it where I had a bulldog who passed away being in a pandemic. He was like my number one buddy in the world. And I refused to kind of let his life be in vain. So I had this concept to help people who are dealing with pet loss. I started a charity 3 years ago called Angel Paws. And I spent hundreds and thousands of hours talking to people about what made dogs unique. And upon learning that and seeing the tools develop, it was kind of natural to try to build a platform that helped both, people celebrate their dogs who are here on Earth and then dogs who had passed away. So I've been hammering away at this for about 7 months now. And, it has so far outkicked what I thought I could do, mainly because of the AI tools. So, that's kind of what I'm up to today. I'm happy to go in depth on that because I can speak forever. And we create tons of different content. I mean, long-term goal, you mentioned world building, is that where we see this going is that, pets are characters that people build up in their minds.
Yeah.
And who populate a world, whether it be a cartoon, a video game, whatever it is, AI is doing all of those things. So that's what we've been testing and learning and working with our community to understand how to make it right.
I love it. That'll be really cool to explore. And so specifically the pet lovers out there should go and check you out. But you also, that's the intersection. If you've got a pet, you're going to be interested in this. And if you want to see how AI is being used to do interesting things, you should go check this out as well.
Yeah, I mean, this was yeah, absolutely. If you have a dog or whatever, sign up. It's free. We give it away free. I'm flipping the bill. We won't even bother to talk about the business model right now. But and from an AI perspective, what I did was somebody who was semi-literate in code went to somebody who is very capable of developing a series of tools, like we talked about, spreadsheets, building the database and stuff behind this. Started with a simple like jot form, and which is something that kicks it right into Google Sheets or into a CSV. So there is so much you can do with AI when you start with kind of that core data. And I think that a lot of what people are doing is they're building these walls that don't exist anymore. They think that I call it Google brain. is that we've so trained at how we have to ask Google a question that we don't even know what we really want anymore. And that's what, AI has changed, is that you can actually just ask what you want to do. So that's a big part of what has empowered what we've developed.
Yeah, fantastic. Good summary. All right, so today though we're gonna kind of hone in on this particular application category that is widely used by a lot of people in business, and that's our spreadsheets. So if we're talking about Microsoft Excel or about Google Sheets, we're going to talk a little bit about what you mean by supercharging these applications. And first off, I guess, like, why is this topic important? What are the potential benefits people can get by thinking and prioritizing this?
Well, you can get things done that you really would have needed a lot of other people's help for. I can give you a very specific example of that. I had developers assisting me in building the platform I was working on, and we had to do something where we schedule these stories that go out. It's meant to be very organic. So it's not like you press a button, you get a story. It's like every once in a while, you're going to get a text message from your dog. And it comes with a picture, but it wasn't working quite right. And they couldn't provide me the reporting that I need. So I just added some code to create a CSV every time I ran a story. And then I wrote a little bit more code to combine all the CSVs together and tell me when was the last time this dog had a story created. So the things that, like, I could not write the code to create the reporting, but I used simple logic, and knowing that now with the assistance of AI, that you can take what was a lot of files and combine them to get exactly what you want. And that's, I think, a big part of this, is that the Excel or the Google Sheet is really just organization of data, and that you don't need to think about it like you used to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least that's a start. Is that
Yep, exactly.
help?
Like foundationally, we're talking about consolidating, organizing, extracting, forecasting, everything that is possible if our data is well organized. And typically, that's going to happen in some form of spreadsheet like this at some level there.
And I agree with the data organization. It comes in two areas, which is in the actual document itself,
Yeah.
and then organizing documents. In this particular example, it actually kind of goes in the face of traditional methods, because I was creating hundreds of CSVs, which you'd be like, I don't do that. But it was like, but with the touch of a button, I'm combining them anyway. So instead of having to create all these calls and learn these different things, if you just use basic logic, and part of the flip side of that was I had to do some things inside the data to make it work. So that making sure you label the columns properly, knowing how to get like a proper timestamp in there. So all the things that you need inside of a CSV, or these are the little things that people sometimes forget. I will also add that at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the smartest things I did was I spent like 2 weeks taking a course on Excel, where it was like, hey, all these things that it can do that you don't know how to do, you should learn. And that was fascinating. Grouping, forecasting, all that stuff. And now the truth is that you don't really have to know how to do that anymore. You just have to know how to ask for what you want.
You just have to prompt it. Yeah, like know what to ask for exactly.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. And like I said, if you can get rid of Google Brain, then you'll go far. So,
Yeah.
but I don't want to leave too far. I just have so many examples of this.
No, that's a really good distinction. So Google Brain is kind of this representation of all of the foundational skill that you needed to have pre-AI to get the software to do what you needed to do. And so the re-examination of those concepts is really like, okay, in a post, like, now that we have AI, how has that changed the rules? Like, which skills do you still need? Which ones do you no longer need? Which new skills do you need to be able to use that effectively?
I think it's just logic, right? It's key logic. Like, you don't, like, especially when it comes to like things like programming, I think people have these psychological barriers, and that they think that, oh, I need somebody really smart to do that. And that when they asked Google, they were like, okay, I know I'm dumb, so I'm just going to be like, I'm dumb. How do I hire somebody to do this? Instead of going, hey, I want to build a web app that has login functions, and I want it to, and they're like, well, you need to connect it to something. Well, you can connect it to Google Sheets if you want. And you're like, well, that's too simple. And why is it too simple? So there's so many ways to go with, like you said, the idea of Google Brain is about not asking for what you want, it's for asking what you hope to get. Like you've already, again, there's a lot to go down with the way that people treat AI. If Google feels like it judges you, where AI feels like it helps you.
That's excellent. That's great. Okay, cool. And so we were talking a little bit about like a framework for this topic, and sometimes I'll think of that in terms of like what's the order of questions that you're going through in your mind, or way that you're looking at something when you're approaching a spreadsheet, problem or opportunity. How does your mind work? How do you organize that to decide, what to do first and where to go from there?
Well, I think about, I try to think about how the data exists in a way that I can use it in the future. I think some of the people, and then also how it's interrelated to other pieces of things I'm going to do. What I mean by that is, I have multiple functions. I said, I'll create a story, I'll create an image. How are those two things going to be interrelated? How am I going to use this data in the future? And then also, are there ways in the future that I can use this data that I don't know how to, but let me record it anyway? So I think, again, separating in those two things is that before you wanted to make it as simple as possible because you were going to view it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now with a lot of the tools, you can make the data really robust and then make your interface for it much simpler. So I think about, like I said, how I'm going to use the data right now, how I'm going to use it in the future, and make sure to not forget it. Also, very much the naming convention. I think that you just want to be clear. Coders are very much like this. Like, how are you going to name a variable? And we're all coding our spreadsheets with our column names and our row names.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. So that would be what I would tell you. I think the logic is, but again, it's hard to get out of that mindset of like, I can't do anything with this. Like, how am I going to get a timestamp in here? How am I going to calculate seconds between this and this? Or how am I going to forecast? I want a random time between 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. I wouldn't have had those skills in something like Google Sheets or Excel before. And now you can get step by step, or you can get a plugin that does it. So again, thinking logically about what I want the data to do, not just now, but in the future, and then also trying to break through that barrier in my mind of the way I was originally trained on them.
Yeah, I can really relate to both of those. So when I think about, okay, spreadsheets and what's the basic organizational method I'm thinking of, I do think that way. I think first in terms of what are the objects, like what are the different record types, and then what are their relationships together. So it's very simple would be like companies and contacts, right? And then
Yeah.
and fields, another object, and so on. And so then I got to think about, okay, well, what are the fields related to those object records? And the relationships between them will also determine like some sequencing I might do in terms of what am I going to export or import first, what I need to look at in what order and structure. But then this other element that is now like an ongoing part of my workflow, which is whatever way I'm thinking about it, I'm going to just bring my AI copilot into the thought process and say, hey, here's how I'm thinking about this. Any adjustments you would make. Sometimes it's very reinforcing, usually adds another good thought or two that I hadn't considered. And again, it's like instead of it having to be this, I can't do this, it's like, oh, here's what I can do. And now let me see how I can augment it with this additional AI tool, Copilot, that can help me think through this.
And I agree with you, but I think there's also two ways to look at data. There's data that you create yourself, where you decide what you're going to get. That's more about planning and forethought. That's easy. Not easy, but hey, you're in control of your own destiny. It's a problem that you either create or solve. But when you're getting external sources of data, that's where, that I think that you can kind of supercharge things. Is that I had to recently like go through American Express. It's like, oh, I'm looking at last year, and I'm like, okay, you describe every transaction the same way. I can kind of clean that data and make it work better. And again, then pivot that data into something else that matters. And from a travel perspective, I do consulting for big travel companies, and they have piles and piles of data that these mid-level travel companies don't have the AI or the advanced data scientists to look through it and say, oh, the profile of our customer really is this. So there's again, two data sets. There's data sets you create yourself, and then the data sets that you get from other people. And I think that you approach them differently. But at the core, the same thing now is like, what do I want to get out of this data?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you shouldn't be, intimidated by the fact that you can't get exactly what you want. Start with exactly what you want, then compromise. Don't start in that compromise world. And that's kind of what I would associate with Google Brain.
Love that. Yeah, that's excellent. We talked a little bit about audiences that are in spreadsheet world and that this is relevant for. We talked about marketing, team sales, data analyst. And so I'm kind of like have a new question emerging, which is as the both like really it's kind of like letting mindsets catch up with this, because there's so many powerful tools already. Yes, the tools will continue to develop. I think the real lag right now is people's just adoption and understanding how to use what's already available to them here. But as that skill set begins to go up and it's more native to people, how do you see like spreadsheet use unfolding across organizations and role types, like changing over time as it becomes easier and easier to use these tools?
I think it's just dashboards, right? Like, I mean, we're visual learners, and I think that's there are a lot of companies that use dashboards to hide the important information so that you don't get under the hood. But when you're building your own dashboards, I think so I think, once you can fine tune the data, and then you can have a lot of different dashboard looks where you're not confined to a pie chart or some sort of graph chart where it can fit the data that comes in. Then I think that's where I would see it going, is that like we're not going to be in a post spreadsheet world, but we're going to be in like I said before, like where I was creating all those CSVs, your capability is innumerable. And I'll give you an example of that is where I'm creating stories for dogs. And one of the ideas we had was just, okay, your dog changes. Like if you go through an adventure, your dog changes. And we wanted to treat their personality like a video game. The slider on the video game, your agility is 100. We're like, okay, well, you went through this. So we actually would take we store the data in that, which your dog starts with a personality of 79 in this category, and we say, hey, AI, he now just went through this news story, how did these change? So there's so many cool ways that you wouldn't think that you could utilize spreadsheets and data, because you'd never say, well, that somebody going through an adventure changes, but you don't know how to quantify it. Mm-hmm. And again, these new things. So I think the idea that the data is going to be overwhelming. That's actually one of the biggest challenges that I see, is that sure, we'll have dashboards. If we become too reliant on dashboards, we stop looking at the data. And then because we have all this automated tech, we're just going to be collecting too much data, and the signal to noise ratio could become a problem.
Those are perfect insights. I love that a lot, that the visual element, that the dashboard element will become more and more prominent. I've been picturing that of like, yeah, that we all have kind of personal dashboards for what's important to us. Yeah. And that's sort of updating and changing and based on inputs that again are stored in some form of sheet, but then displayed visually. And then for individual job roles, you could see it being that the AI, basically the questioning process is like, all right, what's really important to this person's job role? What does success mean to them? And then helping you to determine, okay, well, then here are the metrics that seem to be most important relative to these priorities. And great. And then here are some ideas. So it actually could help you all the way through to the process of thinking how to design that dashboard, and then of course to like display and keep the data updated and pull from the correct sources and so on.
I mean, I can't help to think how it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And that's just my nature, is that I see green field and I go to the, the challenge that is to become, is that I see confirmation bias. Is
Uh-huh.
that it would be very easy to get confirmation bias. I've always been a bit of a chubby fella, and like I don't like to get on the scale every day. So are we going to start? We're going to start seeing the metrics we like and not the metrics we don't. And I think those are some things that we'll see down the road. And that may be also important for when people collect data, is that, you know what, there's some things you don't want to know and you may avoid, but collect it anyway, put it in a spreadsheet. So I think there are some, like, it's very easy to shape this world the way you want it to. And you're only limited by your imagination, but also don't be fooled by your imagination as well. So
That's really interesting. Yeah. So there needs to be like an appetite for self-honesty for people to want to include the right questions to then end up, forecast like.
that's actually one of the biggest challenges I face when I consult with companies, because I always start with what's the goal, right? You always start with what are you trying to do here? And there are a lot of companies that they don't want to have a true goal. It's much more fun to have a nebulous thing, like we want to be the greatest. And like, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
And from somebody who comes from a data-driven decision-making tree, that's something that people have to be aware of. And if you're dealing with spreadsheets and you're dealing with information, don't look for the result you want. Look for the true result. And with AI, it's going to be much easier to find supporting evidence for your theory than it is to get the right theory from the evidence.
That is interesting. Yeah, because I've noticed even with AI, when I do a prompt and I'll see the elements that it brings out that I was missing, and there is sometimes an element of like, okay, no, I wasn't just missing that, I was also avoiding that.
Yeah, and there's AI. Listen, it is a complicated beast, and it will get better. It will continuously get better, and it's a very hard thing to build on right now. I know you're talking about Copilot and some other tools, but right now, building on top of specifically OpenAI, Microsoft and Google have not really released an API that you can build on top of, but these models are shifting. And, if your prompts are extremely exact and you want exact results and they manipulate the model, what was working last week doesn't work anymore. And, that's another thought about, if you're going to build data driven or spreadsheets, or where you're going to grow from AI generated information, that remember, you're not building on concrete. You're kind of building on wet sand, and that you have to build checks in place. That may not follow exactly what the category we're talking about, but I do think it's important when we talk about these tools.
Excellent. We talked a little bit about underused features and then some of the AI features that like you're leveraging and most utilizing AI for in the spreadsheet environment. With underused, you mentioned like interlinking and add-ons. Can you say a little bit more about what that means to you and some like real world examples of that?
Well, I mean, interlinking just mainly means connecting sheets together and connecting data. Like, it all depends on your level of expertise with these tools, right? Like, if you know how to clean the data inside of an Excel. Again, if you're getting somebody else's data where it's not exactly the way they formatted, like it doesn't have, in travel, you'd get, you would want airport codes, and they would give you like 4 letters of a city, and you'd have to fix that. And then you would try to build pivot tables off of that. So the interconnectivity is like, okay, how can I clean the data and then connect two things that aren't supposed to come together? I've worked in companies where their sales data and their contact information was separate. So how do I bring all that together into one thing? So I think that's an underutilized feature of taking two separate pieces of data and bringing them together. And like, again, depends on your level of skill. It could be as simple as a pivot table of saying, how do I count how many widgets we sold in blue last month? And that's interlinked. It's not necessarily interlinking the data, but if you have to bring that information in from two different sources, and you have to normalize it, I think that's, again, I did a lot of stuff with airport codes, and that is that was a fun thing where you would kind of have to normalize two sets of data. But the add-ons I use those more in my personal thing. Bringing things like stock pricing into your sheets, or other market data, like Google scripting, where it's if things are going to change and it's going to impact your information, you can find add-ons that'll do that for you. You don't need to know how.
Bringing in dynamic data as it changes and influencing the spreadsheet and the relationships.
Yes. Yeah. That's what the add-ons that I have used that have had the most value for me. But I've done, data scraping. There's just a lot that I really think that the cleansing and interlinking of data that is not meant to be used together, but then you can. If you have two separate silos inside of your organization and they're two different, formats, they might get two CSVs, and you might have the same last name on both of them, but it's not as easy as doing it. And the add-ons, I don't really use them for work as much as I do in my personal life. And there are a few other hobbies that I have where I extract data using the add-ons.
Excellent. And do you have where do you go to find and collect and choose and make decisions around which add-ons to use?
See, the world has changed, right? Because I mentioned that before, and I'm like, I don't use them anymore. The real answer is the real answer, because now I just use OpenAI, like I use an API call. And I just do whatever I want, because before I was doing a multi-step call to get the end result, where I was like, okay, I want to track this stock price over this period of time and look how, I wanted to buy it at this level and whatever. And now I can just ask the question, right? Like I wanted to buy eBay at the, puts at this date, and it tracks. The simple answer was I would use Google. I would always start with the goal of, hey, this is what I'm trying to do, and I don't want to put in the stock price at the end of the day every day. And it's like, here's an add-on that can do that. And now, one other piece that I would throw in here is that, so most people are not coders, and if you ask them to code anything, their brain would break into this and what I do. And I'm one of those people, only to the extent that I was never good with the commas. Meaning, in coding, if you have a comma in the wrong place, the whole thing doesn't work.
Right.
But learning to utilize Python, if you can at all learn to utilize Python, if you're a spreadsheet person, you're going to be turbocharged, and you can connect that directly. So there's one application that it's not a true application of Google, but it's something I use every day, which is Google Colab. And I don't think I could speak highly enough about Google Colab, because, again, people have these walls that they build up about being intimidated about coding. I would be terrible at it, but I understand the logic of coding. Nowadays, I just say, ChatGPT, I want to take this data and I want to do a loop over this and this and this and this. And it's like, here's the code. I paste it. I hit the button. If it's an error, I go back and go, it said this. And, in the future versions of like Copilot and coding stuff, like you can do that in the advanced data analysis tools, where you're just like, okay, write me the code. So I know I'm going a little bit sideways with your question, but I think I wish I could get people to break down that wall of, man, Python is so easy to use. It's just pure logic.
Yeah, that's perfect. Excellent. Well, I think we're going to have probably a more condensed conversation here today. And I want to get back in and like show some real stuff that you're doing on our next episode. For now, people can go and check you out at pawword.com, PAWWORD.com, and that will be in the show notes, so they can see some of what you're doing with these tools in a real life business example. If people are not already Productivity Hub members, you can follow the link below there to get the member-only courses and lessons and extra content. So gang, from any benefit that you got from this episode, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Leave a comment below around what you're most interested in around this topic of skill sets that are changing now that we have these AI tools, things that you needed and things that you don't need. And then now we're going to go ahead and move into some of our member-only how-to content, and we'll see you next time.